Thank you so much. It's such a great honor for me to become a fellow in Division 17 and especially to share this day with my family who's here and very good friends and students and also mentors in the audience today. The title of my presentation is Looking for the Open Window. And my husband said I should preface that by saying that I wasn't having any suicidal ideation at the time. But it comes from advice that I was given by a mentor when I was an undergraduate student. After speaking with him about difficulties I was having and disappointments I had faced, he said to me, "You know, Lisa, always remember that when God closes a door, he always opens a window." Hence, my quest has been to search for the open window, hope in times of disappointment, hidden opportunities, new challenges, and novel directions. I decided that in preparing this talk that I would, in the next 6 minutes, I want to describe just 3 open windows in my life. The first, multiculturalism and testing. The second, the qualitative revolution. And the third, Google.com. I entered the field of counseling psychology at an exciting time when attention to multiculturalism was growing. There was innovative research being conducted by amazing scholars focusing on a number of cultural fronts. While completing my doctorate, I worked as a psychological examiner in my home state of Hawaii. I administered about 300 IQ tests over a number of summers as part of evaluations to determine educational classifications. I realized quickly that while information was always gathered about the background of the child, my role was to provide the IQ score that back then was entered into a formula to determine if they were eligible for services. There was always a disclaimer in the formula indicating that the concerns or difficulties were not due to cultural or educational factors. The limitations of reliance on efficient IQ tests administered in an hour, yielding numerical scores, was readily apparent to so many of us. How could one ignore the context of the individual? Intelligence was more than just a score. And yet, as I sat in on those educational meetings, the one thing that, as I would talk about the student that I had tested, the one thing they would say, "Oh, Lisa, you know what, just give us the score. What's the score?" I supported the fundamental premise endorsed by like-minded colleagues that cultural impacts the measurement of all psychological phenomena, including intelligence tests. The majority of my work for the past 2 decades has been spent in collaboration with other scholars to promote an understanding of multiculturalism and its impact on mainstream assessment practices. This work has not been without disappointment, as I found that I could not speak to issues of environment and culture and assessment without demonstrating repeatedly that I also understood the genetic and hereditary arguments regarding intelligence test score differences by racial and ethnic group. I understood these arguments and recognized the supportive evidence, but my focus, what I wanted to know, has always been on understanding that portion of variance that could be attributed to culture and environment, which can potentially be better understood and in some instances be changed. Criticisms of my work are present in the literature. I recently received an email from a biologist accusing me of adhering to the anti-racist liberal agenda and ignoring the empirical evidence regarding a genetic and hereditary perspective. I was at first upset by this email. Then a window opened and a colleague mentioned that to receive this message meant that he had read my work, and though he had found it lacking, he had read it nonetheless. Okay. So, to be controversial meant being cutting edge, and as she pointed out, aren't you anti-racist? And aren't you liberal? Fred Wirtz wrote an amazing article called The Qualitative Revolution. Another window of influence in my life was this. While seemingly disparate from my work on intelligence and assessment practices, in truth, qualitative inquiry seemed to be a natural outgrowth, since these methodologies readily indicate that in order to understand an individual's life or community in context, one must adhere to methodologies that are both open, flexible, and rigorous. This research challenged my thinking regarding who has voice. And as one colleague noted in a proverb from the African American community, when the lion tells the story, the hunter is no longer a hero. Finally, Google.com. Within every talk, I generally mention a story about my daughter, so sorry, Caitlin, this one is no different. But when my daughter, Caitlin, was in kindergarten, I recall so vividly that she came home one day so excited. Mommy, did you know that your name is in Google? I think she has never been so impressed with my work as she was that day. It raised the issue then, as it does now, that I'm 50 and 20 years past obtaining my doctoral degree. What is it that I want to have written in Google when my academic career finishes? And the answer comes readily. I want to help others find their open windows. Our students and others will forward the movements that I have been a small part of. The work in the area of multiculturalism has grown in exciting ways, but there is so much more to be done. I still get phone calls and emails from clinicians and researchers about what tests can be used with refugees, with immigrants, people in other countries. Qualitative strategies continue to gain ground in our discipline and has for so long privileged quantitative methodologies. So our work continues, and hopefully windows will continue to open as we move forward. Thank you.